Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Giles Gillette. I'm the CEO of NASCEE, and I'm really excited to have you all on this call. The topic for this discussion this morning is collaboration in action, and it's a partnership between NASCEE and IPASA and VVOB. And it really stems from the work that IPASA did looking at a series of case studies around collaboration recently that was launched, and we'll just make sure that the link to the report is in the chat, so that if you want to go and reference that and get some more of the detail, you can. So look out for that in the chat. But this piece of work was done by Tara Pauls and Guatu, and we are really lucky to have Tara with us for this session to take us through some of the lessons learned. And this has been a series, so this is the second of the series so far. And if you were part of the first conversation, we're trying to build on that. So there might be a little bit of an overlap in terms of what Tara shares, but it's probably going to be some new information that is aligned to the specific case study we're doing that was that VVOB supported, and that speaks to climate change in education, which is often something in the bigger systems change work that is forgotten or has less of a profile or priority, and actually something that we all need to be taking obviously very seriously and integrating and aligning to all our work. So I think, for me today is about listening and understanding and getting a better perspective of the work, but the lessons around collaboration are really important for how we move forward as a sector. And NASCEE's sort of central pillar around coordinating a fairly fragmented system is about collaboration, and it's something that we're very passionate about and want to add value to. So we've got quite a full program. I'm going to hand over to Tara in a minute. She will take you through some insights. We'll then have a little bit of a Q&A or move straight into a panel depending on how the time is looking. We've then got a great panel with some government officials, some people that are from VVOB, Ayanda or Liko Botman from the Department of Education, Ayanda Satori from VVOB, and then Shanu Missa, who's Deputy Director of Biodiversity Education and Public Engagement at South African National Biodiversity Institute. So it's a really nice mix that's going to be speaking to this case study directly. So I think from NASCEE's perspective, first of all, thanks to all of you for logging in. Keen to make this interactive and for it to be valuable for you, but for you to also ask the difficult questions, engage. That's what these things are for. Tara, thank you so much for the partnership on this and the willingness, and then to IPASA for continuing to partner with us on this work. We want to try and stretch it out as much as we can so that more people can be exposed to it. So thank you for the work that you did and for how we are moving this forward, and then to the VVOB team, who have been a long-standing NASCEE member. Thanks for the support and for partnering with us on this project. So great to have you all. Welcome. And Tara, can I hand over to you to take it forward in terms of some of the insights that are relevant to this case study and how you want to present them. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Giles, and thank you, everyone here from NASCEE and IPASA, and thank you to all of the rest of you for being interested in this. Particular thanks also to everyone from VVOB and Green Matter and government and Fundisa for Change who participated in interviews for this case study. It was very much based on insights of yours. I just pulled them all together. So I'm going to share a few slides and briefly outline what this project was about, but then the core of this case study series is about the nature of collaboration. And that is something we speak about too rarely in the social development sector, and particularly in then the education sector. It's such an important part of what we do, or what would enable greater impact in the world, which is what we're all trying to achieve. But there is something very particular about how we do things together, which is distinct from what are we doing. And so program design, what works, all of these kinds of technical areas that we all spend, most of our time thinking about. The how do we do this together? How do we collaborate? Is a layer on top of that, which also has technical aspects, which also has really important institutional governance, identity aspects that we maybe don't often talk about too explicitly. And that's what this project is about, is to try and make some of that more transparent and more explicit. So let me share something about this particular project with you. I hope that's visible. So the Keep It Cool 2 project, as we've heard, is part of this Collaboration in South Africa project. There were 9 case studies. So this is one of them, and you can find all of them on the IPASA website. So the Keep It Cool 2 project, part of the Fundisa for Change network. So the full title is, in fact, Fundisa for Change, Keep It Cool Climate Change Education Project. The goal is to build capacity related to climate change in South Africa by increasing broad-based awareness, knowledge, and skills among children in the public schooling system, which then necessarily means working with teachers to teach the children this knowledge, which means you then have to train the teachers with the appropriate materials, but also through the appropriate training methodologies. So the intent is to include climate change content in the life orientation curriculum, obviously then in close collaboration with the DBE, since it's a curriculum intervention. And then there is a blended continuous professional teacher development approach. So a combination of online teacher training materials, face-to-face training, professional learning communities, and quite a large scope. So 60 schools, 180 teachers, because of 3 provinces to date. Quite possibly, the intention is to make this larger as we go. The way in which the case studies are all structured is to try and unpack the nature of the collaborative component by looking at why a collaboration. So not just why do we need the project. I think we don't have to debate here about whether it's necessary to get climate change into the curriculum. But the question is, why does it need to be several organizations working together to get climate change into the curriculum? Who then was collaborating, and what is the nature of the relationships between them? What are the particular practices around collaboration? So not how do we train, but how do we build a training system together as multiple organizations, right? How long does this take? This question of timelines and phases is always one that's very important in thinking about collaborations. And then finally, so what? Like, does it work? What is the effect that it has to do this collaboratively? So one of the key insights really in this entire case study series is that the purpose of collaborations is often larger than to do a project. The collaborative component is about addressing systemic gaps and building systemic assets. The project is just a vehicle for a much longer and larger set of goals. And the project format tends to be an artifact of funding cycles and funding governance structures, right? But actually the relationships are there at a much longer time frame and with a bigger scope. The particular KIC2 or the KIC2 project had the same broad set of strategic goals as a collaboration as many of the other case studies. So this does seem to be a bit of a standard. The collaborative component was about how do we get the system, how do we get government to adopt a particular set of practices and tools. No single individual or organization can usually engage convincingly with the whole system. What kinds of collaborations do we need to be able to engage with government? And we'll have part of that as the panel discussion. Collaborations often address fragmentation. So in this case, it's about linking sectors. So when you have a particular content area like climate and a particular vehicle for that content area, which is the public education system, how do you bring those two sectors together that usually don't necessarily talk to each other that much? Then you have leveraging technical complementarity. In this case, it was technical content knowledge, so the climate, with technical teacher training knowledge. How do you formulate complex scientific content in a way that is at an appropriate level for basic education system teachers and different grade levels, right? So, I mean, you have your climate change scientists who are dealing in the university level and at policy level and at, you know, big sort of economic systems and scientific systems. How do you get that logic simplified for a fifth grader, seventh grader, ninth grader, and the teachers who then have to bring that across? And then developing knowledge assets that are then available, not just for a specific project, but more broadly to address this gap that the system has. When we then look at who is part of this particular collaboration, what this picture shows is that there are a lot of people involved, right? One of the quotes of one of the people interviewed for this was that there are many moving parts. That was the case for both iterations of this. There was a KIC 1 and a KIC 2. The other important point to notice here is that there are different functions. So we have our funders in blue, we have our NPOs in gray, we have our government in red, and our sort of universities in yellow. And each of those kinds of partners has very different structures, very different governance processes, very different communication logic. So it's not just two different organizations with similar sort of aligned systems. You have to figure out how to work together at extremely different scales, incentive logics. There's so many dimensions of difference that have to be managed in a collaboration like this, and being able to do that intentionally and consciously is a massive skill set. Then the last thing I want to point out here is that you've got your actors with a solid line and a dotted line. So the solid line are directly involved in the KIC 2 project, and the dotted line are indirectly involved. So when you do an organogram for a project, you might only show the directly involved projects or organizations ordinarily. But if you're thinking from a collaborative perspective, the indirectly involved agencies are incredibly important. So Fundisa for Change was actually formally involved, part of the steering committee. But Sanby, DHET, Rhodes University, for example, and various other universities, they were part of developing some of the materials in the first KIC 1. They were part of the broader Fundisa for Change network. The Biodiversity Human Capital Development Strategy brings all of these different agencies together. And that actually comes together into the knowledge products that are the core of this project. So if you just pretend those didn't exist, you'd be missing out on the core sort of assets that this project was able to draw on, and those are relational assets. Okay, let's talk briefly about how the particular relationships in this collaboration were held together. And the particular value of this case study was that it is a collaboration across sectors, across the environmental and the education sector. So key insights really from this case study are that relationships take time. It takes time and effort to build them. And that for KIC2, a lot of the relationships that were brought into this were already present. The NGOs had built them already previously over time and could bring that capital into the collaboration. Really important, the necessity of recognizing those existing deep relationships, especially with government. So when you have an NGO or a funder that has existing trust and personal relationships, that is an asset, that is a very important thing to recognize. And that also importantly, organizational relationships build on individual relationships. So it's not just that there's a particular organization that's had an MOU for a long period of time, it's that the individuals who lead or manage that have personal relationships. They've got somebody's phone number in their phone, they can pick it up, they know each other, they've built trust, not just as a sort of abstract reputation, but as a real concrete personal reputation. That's really important. The second layer is, it's not just about individuals, it is also about systems, and that those systems must make real a set of values, particularly around transparency, aims, timeline expectations. So the communication needs to not just be, hey, let's go have a braai and a drink and a coffee, but actually, what are we talking about? What is substantively the trust for this work built on? There's then also shared measurement based on transparency about what matters. And that is not an easy process. I mean, please do read the actual case study write-up. What some examples were here is that you had different organizations in this collaboration coming in with different understandings of what was the most important goal and what really matters. Is what matters, for example, getting the technical detail right of the climate change science, or is what matters getting the big story of climate change right for a sort of younger audience? And so therefore, it's not about it's about valuing the science, but not necessarily understanding the science. It's about telling the story of the science. So, I mean, the people involved might have a different way of summarizing that, but you can see where there might be a tension. And then as a group, you have to find a way of having a conversation about that tension. What is the material and what is the training material actually trying to get across here? And then finally, what's really valuable here, and that some collaborations are in this whole series of 9 stories, are really trying to get their heads around, which is how do we explicitly measure not just what we're doing, but how well we're doing it together. So measuring the quality of collaboration with some explicit goal setting around how well we work together. And then finally, really respecting the linkages between a particular project, in this case, KIC2, and the broader ecosystem. So how does this particular project connect with wider networks? So Fundisa for Change, very importantly here. Does the project create shared or public assets? So is it just our material, or are we actually making this public for everyone else to use as well? And how does that function? And then does the project build overall ecosystem connectivity? So does it link people with each other and organizations with each other who will be able to continue working together beyond the particular funding and timeline of this project? Brief mention of timelines. So we're looking at 2010 to 2030 here. The KIC1 and KIC2 projects were each 2 or 3 years long. But there is no way they could have achieved what they respectively achieved without sitting on the incredible amount of work that had been done over 40 years, well, 20 years actually, by a lot of the same individuals and organizations, putting together the Biodiversity Human Capital Development Strategy, and then Fundisa for Change as a network. And the NGOs, so Green Matter and VVOB, and the relationship between VVOB and DBE within this broader Fundisa for Change network was really what allowed these much shorter projects to achieve what they did. And then finally, so what? What did the project produce, right? So on the one hand, you have very practical outputs. These shared learning tools and knowledge assets. So the open source materials, training and learning tools, absolutely, produced in KIC 1, deepened and spread in KIC 2, not just the content, but also the tools themselves, open source training, learning tools, platforms, etc. But in addition to that, that's often what we then stop with when we're just looking at a project level. But if we're looking at a collaborative level, there is something that is built, which I think makes sense to call network capital. There might be other ways of thinking about this. But the word capital, it's a store of value. It's a store of relational and reputational value that you can transfer to some extent. So VVOB had and has a very long-standing trusting relationship with the DBE. Green Matter, not so much, because that's not their core sector. So by working together, some of that reputation can be shared. I mean, this is very much for discussion now by the panel. It'll be very interesting to hear your thoughts on this. Another way of thinking about it is relational infrastructure. We're very used to being aware of the value of this when you're talking about, let's say, mining or power production, right? So you can't actually get your mining investment out of the particular mine unless you've got a trade track, but when we're talking about social development projects, what's the equivalent of that? How do we get our tools, our knowledge resources, our processes out into the world to do what they need to do if we don't have train tracks, if we don't have an infrastructure that allows that knowledge to percolate and to spread and to be used? So a project like this is collaboratively producing that infrastructure, constantly recreating it, strengthening relationships across education environment sectors, including across government departments and among sector-embedded NPOs that otherwise may not have gotten to know each other and not have been able to work together. And what enables that on a continuous basis is a backbone network in this case. In other projects and other case studies, we've talked about backbone organizations. There are many different ways of being a backbone organization. In this case, very importantly, a backbone network. So the continued strong Fundisa for Change backbone, which enabled coordination, technical support, and where the project can draw from, but also give back into, so that there's this longer term impact chain. All right, I'm going to leave it there and bring us across into the panel. Can I just check? And let me actually hand this over to Viwe. I think you are going to manage the Q&A and then introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Tara. I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking let's rather go straight into the panel as your instincts were saying. So as Giles did a short introduction, we're joined by 3 panelists today. Director for Social Cohesion and Equity in Education at the Department of Basic Education, Uliko Botoman. The project coordinator for the Keep It Cool program from VVOB, Ayanda Sitole, and then Shanu Mesa, who's the Deputy Director for Biodiversity Education and Public Engagement at SANBI, and also the National Coordinator for Fundisa for Change program. So I'd like to invite our panelists to just switch their cameras on so that our attendees can see you all, and then Tara will go through some of the questions and then we'll go to a Q&A afterwards.
Hi, Shanu. I'm seeing you. Am I seeing Ayanda? There we go. Hi, Ayanda. And then Liko, are you here? I'm not actually seeing Liko. Liko, are you here? Oh, there we are. Yes. Could you switch on your camera first, please? All right. Well, I was going to start with Liko, but I'm sure he's there and he'll join us just now. But then let's start with Ayanda. Hello. So maybe as the project manager, I mean, it's very much appropriate for you to kick us off. But also just as VVOB, you are an interesting sort of hybrid organization in the first place. You're both a funding channel and a sort of operational NGO in some ways. What is the nature of your relationship with government in particular? Longer term, not just for this project, but how do you generally think about the importance and the quality of relationships with government in South Africa? And for you, what are the most important components or elements of this relationship?
Thank you, Tara, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really great to see the final product and the thinking that went with this case study. So VVOB, our core mandate really is to support education ministries in really meeting their objectives. We're not necessarily a funder, but we are funded by the Belgian government, and we do then also look for funding for particular objectives or priorities that the government is trying to meet. So that's kind of, we really are about supporting the education and really making sure that the government departments that we work with are technically supported. I think what we, like you said, we come with some sort of funding, and we do come with technical and operational support for the department. So but our work primarily centers around teacher development, and also the capacity building of officials as well. So we really work across a number of, as our relationship with the department evolves, we're seeing ourselves work across a number of branches within the department. And naturally, you would think, education, we would sit in curriculum, but we also work with teacher development, district operations, and various branches, social cohesion. So we've seen ourselves sort of broaden our scope in terms of working with the department. I do not want to take much time, but yeah, that's kind of what we do.
So maybe then you could just follow on a bit from that. As you've said, you have worked in collaboration with the DBE in particular for decades, and across multiple units, departments, directorates of the DBE. So that in and of itself is sort of micro collaborating within an organization, getting different parts of the DBE almost to talk to each other in different ways. So you have this pre-existing relationship. Now you have a project like KIC, where you're working with a whole range of other organizations outside of the DBE, but also with the DBE. So how does that experience of collaborating multi-sectorally, how was that different from when you partner with the government on your own? What are the dynamics when you layer these collaborative relationships on top of each other?
I think that one of the biggest, not challenges, but complexity really, is that we all come with our different mandates, right? That every organization that we partner with, although we want to meet the same objective, but the how and the journey looks a bit different. And so coming together in this kind of a project, I think the project coordinator really is to try and make sure that we meet the bigger objective, but also are sensitive and intentional about other organizations' mandates and agendas, and also just being transparent and really reminding the collective of what we're trying to achieve together. And also just it requires us to be agile. It requires us to also, I think as a collective, we have a certain objective and we have a certain way in which we see the implementation. Once you start working with other partner or government partners, even at district level, because the experience you would have at national and the experience you would have at provincial and district completely different. So how do we become agile enough without losing the objective? It's a tough balance. There are some times when you need to hold the structure very tightly, and then there are some times where you need to let the fluidity of the collaboration really take its place. But we're finding when you interviewed us last year, we were in our pilot phase. And so this year, we're really now trying to disseminate to other districts. And we are, I think, as a collective, forced to allow the other players who've come in at district level, other districts, to now take ownership. And the program does look a little bit different from what we initially conceptualized. I mean, we were in life orientation, and now we've seen that the districts and provinces have taken other subjects, natural science, social science. So we are seeing this growth. How do we still maintain that structure and ownership, but also allowing the program to evolve and take its own shape now? So that's kind of where we are. I hope I've answered your question,
Yes.
Tar.
Very much so. Thank you. Absolutely. And I think that actually is a beautiful segue to Liko. Hello. Because I'd love to hear your perspective now from within government. What is the value from your perspective of collaborating with independent funders, with NGOs, and then particularly with such a sort of complex, multifaceted group of organizations like the KIC projects? What from government's perspective, why collaborate?
Thank you so much, Tara, for that question, and good morning to the colleagues that have joined the webinar. I think that KIC has been a great demonstration for us that a multi-sectoral and intersectoral collaboration for anything as big as education for sustainable development and climate change, how important that is. And I think, and I always make the point when I engage with people for the first time in the space of, environment, that we should learn very quickly from the experience of this country in as far as HIV management is concerned. Because there were pieces of work that were happening everywhere, small fires being lit everywhere in that space. And we're not making the kind of impact that we wanted to make. And part of the reason was that we were not as organized. In fact, government was not using its power to convene properly. And so it just, continued to work in a disparate manner with different partners and taking whatever was being proposed to government. And I think what KIC has done was to consolidate the space already, whilst government is still trying to get around its role to convene, consolidate the space so that if you're looking for a model that is overarching and that is comprehensive, you are looking at the KIC model, because it does have the curriculum elements to it. It does have teacher development elements to it. It even does have learning and teaching support materials development to it. And lastly, the one that is underrated by many of our partners, the core curricular space. Because the core curricular space for us is very important, particularly when we're talking about behavior change. It is very clear, Tara, that behavior change is not going to be achieved just by curricular interventions. because we know that curriculum is regulated, it is timed, and it is mostly done for assessment purposes. But if you're looking to change behavior, then it means then that we're going to have to capitalize on what the co-curricular space provides to us for us to be able to do that. And so the KIC project has been a great illustration of what government can achieve working with its partners. And I just want to say that even the IPASA network that we've recently been exposed to and invited into is also promising that potential, because it says, here is a community of practice of people that have got either expertise, or they've got resources, or they've got connections in the space. Here is it. Government must be very clear about what the needs are, so that as the community of practice organizers, they know exactly what to do to assist government. But if we as government are not very clear on what we want, the networks that have been created are not going to be able to respond to the needs that government is going to. So it's not just about us exercising our power to convene, but it is also about clarifying the needs that are in the sector, so that networks of this nature can be able to assist us by giving us a soothing ointment to where the shoe pinches the most.
Thank you, Liko. That is absolutely fantastic. And in fact, I'd like to pick up on that convening question and ask Shano to speak to that, because that is precisely my understanding of what Fundisa for Change was set out to do and does. You know, really what that experience of the iterative, and so it's not just convening once, right? It's a continual iterative convening space, which enables exactly the kinds of things that Liko's just been speaking about. It's the agenda setting, it's the sort of continuous relationship building and reconstructing over and over and over again. So yeah, Shana, could you speak to us a bit about sort of the importance of convening and iterative collaboration spaces?
So I think I just want to say collaboration is never easy. Collaboration is always a dynamic and a fluid process. And I just want to start by saying that. But I think for me, the things that I've learned over time is that, firstly, that, you know, environmental challenges are extremely complex. And even the latest biodiversity, the National Biodiversity Assessment is making the same statement. The whole of government and whole of society approach, and that the need for collaboration is quite critical. So, I mean, you know, based on that, I think for me, if I had to say, you know, what is one of the most important aspects of convening, and it has to be the relationships. I think relationship building and putting effort into relationship building has to be, and seeing those relational aspects is one of the most critical things. And I think you made a similar comment, Tara, at the start. You know, building those relationships, building trust, also having a proper coordination mechanism, because as Fundisa for Change, the one thing that we you know, aimed to deal with was the fragmentation, and at the same time building up the national system. And as a network, you know, and being providing an opportunity for projects and programs to come into a system that where it's building a system and helping to contribute to that system. I think for me that has been quite critical. So I would say, you know, relationships and relationship building, having a proper coordination mechanism, but also having accountability mechanisms, mechanisms where, like, for example, we have a program steering committee, you know, and the governance mechanisms are important, and having a multi-sectorial steering committee is quite important, because made up of your government, made up of NGO, made up of your universities, etc. And we see that as quite critical. It's an important learning, and that's where a lot of the decisions get taken, made, people are held accountable. But also I think the co-creation of projects working together right from the start, prior to projects actually being, people seeking proposals, right from project conceptualization stage, I think is quite important, so that objectives kind of align and everyone has a similar or a vision of where we want to go to. So those have been some of the key things, I think, Tara, that I could say important that I've learned about in the past. And I also think it's not just about formal, formal agreements. There are times for formal agreements and then there are times for informal agreements. And I think those are also important things to be considering. So let me leave it at there, otherwise I'll take up your whole time just chatting about this.
Thank you very much. I think it would be wonderful to have a series of questions, maybe a round of questions from the rest of the audience. Very aware, just looking at names, that there are a lot of people here who yourselves have a lot of experience in the sector, a lot of experience with collaborations. Please feel free to share your thoughts. Yes, fantastic, Duncan, thank you. And also, if you have questions for the panelists, please go ahead. Please go ahead and raise some hands. Duncan, please go ahead.
Thanks. Tara, could you pull up your presentation to where all the players?
Yes.
Oh, okay, if you can pull that up.
Let me do that.
So while you're pulling that up, so the quote was not many moving parts. The quote was too many moving parts.
Yes.
And that was not me. I attribute that to Wilfred Tiernes, who is the senior lead with VVOB. And, and that was during the context of KIC 1. Mm. And what actually hasn't changed between KIC 1 and KIC 2 is that the complexity remains. It's taken time for the complexity to become less complex. Mm. So what you mentioned there, just re-emphasizing the point that really it takes a lot of time to develop these complex relationships and collaboration that goes with it. So that was just the one thing I wanted to emphasize, is that time is absolutely critical. The second point I just wanted to emphasize, in this diagram of yours, you will see the Lewis Foundation and you will see the Flanders government, two funders, okay? And quite correctly depicted is that they are not linked. And that is a key weakness in our system, is that there is insufficient funder collaboration to ensure that the money is well directed, the resources are well directed. I have actually never met the Flanders representative, and that is my weakness as a representative of the Lewis Foundation. And that is something that going forward, we as funders, and there'll be a number of philanthropies in the room today, really need to get our minds around how we collaborate better with this purpose. The last point I want to make is I was part of a workshop in KwaZulu-Natal as it relates to KIC 2. And the best part of the whole thing was to what extent the Department of Basic Education have taken ownership of the process. Now, as you mentioned in your report, that is absolutely, this falls firmly within basic education, and it is firmly the mandate of the department. So to do it as a separate or just collaborating with the department is not enough. It's got to be in the department, and the department has to be taking ownership. So those are just the 3 points I just wanted to make coming out of this. So actually, I would change the diagram. I would put DBE as the big circle rather than I would make it as the all-encompassing circle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Duncan. All right, anyone else want to contribute, ask questions of the panelists? Share your own experiences of collaborations in this sector? Give you some time. Ayanda, yes, please.
Yes, Tara, I think whilst people are maybe still thinking, I really appreciated Duncan's last sentiments around ownership. And I think this year we are really seeing the ownership as, at least at, district level. I think we're doing less this year. But that ownership also takes time, and being cognizant of the fact that, departmental officials already have so much on their plate, already have so many objectives that they need to meet. And them finding the space and taking that ownership now has been really, we worked hard at it. So I think as the collective, we can safely say the awareness has been created and we're beginning to see ownership. But that doesn't come with additional support. I mean, we still have to walk the journey with the department. But yeah, I think ownership has been, I think for this year already, we're seeing, at least the department take more of a lead this year, which is really great to see.
Thank you, Ayanda. Michaela, I see your hand.
Hello, thank you so much. So with both what Ayanda and Duncan have mentioned, I have a question along the lines of how do you, so especially if you're a small MPO or you're running small projects, how do you end up getting in the room with government or beginning conversations? Because there is, just that highlight of how important it is that projects are embedded within the system and not additions. So yeah, if there's any insight or advice there, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Michaela. Anyone else want to add a question at this point? Then maybe we can just go around quickly, Ayanda, Shanu, and then end up with Liko in terms of advice. Oh, okay. Can I actually just ask? Let's take Melia, and then we'll go around to all of you. Melia, please go ahead. Melia.
Hello.
Yes. Hello. We can hear you.
Yes. Morning, everyone. This is my first time to be on this. I've been receiving your messages and invitation. So today I decided to be part of this. I am a member of, I run an NPO that is focusing on early childhood development because I believe that is the foundation of each and every child. And I want to know, how do we make the DBE to really, take into consideration what we have done. We have done a research, I think, for the past 23 years. And I believe if we can share what we have learned with everyone, it will help in our Department of Education, especially in the foundation phase.
Thank you very much. So those two questions are actually quite similar in a way of how do we hear each other and come to be in relationship with each other. So Ayanda, your thoughts and experiences on those questions.
I can't answer the how, but I can tell her, what VVOB has done. So VVOB does have an MOU with the Department of Basic Education. And when we work, and also MOUs within provinces that we work, so there is like a formal agreement in terms of our relationship between DBE and VVOB. But also it's to work with organizations like Fundisa who have this coordinated relationship or body. So really it is to be part of a network that already has this coordinated space. I think that would probably bring you closer to working more aligned with the government. Yeah, but I think the best person to speak about the how is probably Liko and Shanu, who worked for a number of years on really outlining that.
Can I ask Shanu, and then maybe even Viwe from NASCEE's perspective, you might also have some views on this. But yeah, Shanu, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing is that it's important to belong to a network. I think, when I just think back to, individuals wanting to work with the department, can you imagine, and Liko, you can just bear with me, Liko, how many organizations out there actually want to work with the department. And sometimes we end up pulling officials in so many different ways and, in so many different avenues, because we all want our individual space and we all want to do our individual thing. But I think when you speak with a more coordinated voice, with a more, when you have a bigger network and a larger body of research, because your research does one thing or points to one thing, but then there's a number of people that have done similar kind of research. So how we bring those together, and then how we present the case and present the argument for what it is that you want to see. So I would say that is one avenue, is belonging to a network, and an open network that you can then be part of is important. Yeah, so that we all are thinking beyond just me and my, to us and our collective, of what we can do as a collective rather than just individuals. So, that's from my perspective. And I'm talking also from my perspective of being in government, what would be something to think about.
Liko, let me pass it to you.
Sure, Tara. I think the two fellow panelists are correct in what they are saying, but I think, colleagues, we also will need to be honest about some of the things that actually make collaboration not to work. As Shanu is saying, that there are so many organizations that can contribute something into the bigger pot when they work with government. But where we always get stuck is when the contributing organizations want to maintain their distinct identity in the collaboration. That's why, Duncan, you'll always have that very complicated diagram, because everybody wants to see themselves as a distinct thing or as a distinct entity within that diagram. And from where we're sitting now as government, because we'll require the technical expertise and the resources that come from partners, we're fine with that complexity, because anyway, we're running a very complex sector, 12 million learners, more than 500,000 teachers, more than 25,000 schools. So you're just adding a very small complexity to the complexity, to the super complexity. And so we'll allow the community of practice to do that, if that's what they want. But the moment the partners understand what Duncan is saying when he says, actually, colleagues, just have the big convener, as the big diagram, and everybody supporting that, suddenly now it clears that diagram, because everybody understands that we are supporting the country in achieving these targets, not we have obtained endorsement from the Department of Basic Education to do this. That's a difference, because if you're obtaining endorsement for a very small little project with 17 schools to do that, we are not going to move anywhere as a country. So we're going to need, as the people who are here, to be very comfortable with saying that we're throwing what we have that can reach 17 schools into the big pot for us to be able to move the country forward. That's not endorsement, but that's contributing to supporting the state to do what it is supposed to do. That's the first thing. So this thing of distinct identities being recognized as we move along is what's going to complicate our lives. The second thing that I want to say is that we are not going to have a more coordinated voice until we understand that when you are partnering with government, there's nothing wrong about incubating processes for government. So it's not all of us that must chase LICO for LICO to hold the work. There is what you call an implementing partner model, colleagues, because the implementing partner model allows you to be able to say that you are implementing on behalf of basic education, if it's basic education, or higher education, if it's higher education, or DFFE, if it is DFFE. So that's the implementing partner model. And so it doesn't matter who comes, whether it's going to be Michaela, it's going to be Bongani, or it's going to be Sizwe, but they are very clear that they are doing it on behalf of government. But if they are going to do it because they are doing it for themselves and to stroke their own egos about what they were able to achieve in working with government, again, we have a problem. I'm being frank, colleagues, and I'm being honest. If we are going to move forward, that's the mind shift and the almost like the DNA of the work that we're going to need to develop in our heads if we're going to get into this space and agree that those are the founding principles of how we're going to work together. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is to respond to Michaela's question. How do we get into the room? My advice, colleagues, is that getting in the room is firstly understanding what level of engagement are you using to get into the room, based on how big or how small is what you're bringing that's supposed to get you into the room. Because the system has got spheres. We've got the national sphere, we've got the provincial sphere, we've got the district sphere, and then we've got an institutional sphere, which is the schools. And often what I find, Tara, is that partners or potential partners would come, they've got a very small resource base that will reach 12 schools or 22 schools, but they want to have that conversation with the national office. And so I'm saying that you're not going to get attention from the national office if you're talking about 5 schools or 22 schools, but you want that conversation to be a national conversation. It is best to rather identify your cluster of schools or clusters of schools within districts for you to get into the room like that for that amount of muscle that you have. Because when it comes to national, we have to talk big and scale when we're talking about national. But now partners, because we're also in a position where we want to get as many people as we can get in the room, we will give attention as a national department to every partner, whether they're bringing 2 or 25 or 7 or 17 schools. We will give that attention because we want to get as many people as possible in the room. But I'm saying that we need to be smart about how we approach the sector and the level at which we approach it if we want to be in the room. Because some of you colleagues are doing work that is going to help us test proof of concept. Case in point, the KIC. KIC is proof of concept that has been tested in a couple of schools, and that's why we're now talking scale. And I think there's work that many of the partners that are here have done, for example, in the space of early childhood education and climate change, and they're doing that work. And I think they're now ready to bring that work into the system so that they say, look, we've tested proof of concept with 17 ECD sites, and we can tell you that if this is what you want to approach or achieve as a sector, these are the principles, these are the materials, these are the resources that we have used, which have worked. So I'm saying, colleagues, that we're gonna have to look at the entry point or the gateway or the pathway that we use to get into the room. But if we want to get into the room at national, it has got to come with scale, and it has got to come with great financial muscle for national, and everything else then can be done there. Same as the lever of change that you're engaging as well. A lot of us are so preoccupied and anal about a curriculum. And I always say, hey, colleagues, if you can go to what people have been doing in the curriculum, you'll realize that the space is becoming more and more constricted. Let's look at other ways and means of how we can do this, because for many of the funders, one of the markers of success is how did you inform curriculum, and how did you influence curriculum? And I think we also need to let go of those mindsets. There's policy, there's teacher development, there's materials that must be developed, there's all of these other things. And I think us being just preoccupied about the curriculum is also going to be something that is going to be shooting us in the foot if we want to move forward as a collective.
Thank you, Liko. I really, really appreciate that you're kind of sharing very, very clear and very direct perspectives. And I think it's incredibly valuable. Giles, I see your hand up. And then I also wanted to just say that we're very lucky to, in fact, have Leonora Dowley from the International Education Funders Group here today with us. And I was just wondering, maybe, Giles, viewer, if you'd be happy for Leonora to come into this conversation at this point, because I think then we can continue the sort of back and forth amongst all of the speakers once we've heard from Leonora, because I think now exactly taking this national conversation and saying, how does this compare to internationally, what we're seeing in different contexts would be incredibly valuable. But go ahead, Giles, tell us what your thinking is.
Sure, thanks. I'll be quick and then hand over to Leonora. I think, Liko, thanks for the feedback and direct, clear, I suppose, provocation in a way for civil society in terms of how we engage. I think what I want to say is that NASCEE's role is around supporting civil society in bringing strong innovation to the department. And I think what we're working on as a collective is how to do that better. We can't be everywhere yet. We're working at the moment quite intensively in ECD. We're looking at FLN, but obviously climate change impacts across all of those. And so, if you remember where Bridge used to sit, Bridge used to sit as a means to connect government and civil society, and NASCEE is holding some of that role, but it's more than that now, where we've actually got to be able to see strength in unity, and then how we position scalable innovation in a more organized way for you, Liko, at the department. And that means at a district, provincial, and national level, as well as school. And so I think this sort of idea of being stronger together, so instead of all of us trying to go to the department at different times, let's get together, let's organize ourselves, and then let's take a more consolidated process to the department that's been well thought through by us first. And so we can do a lot of that distilling before it comes to you. So that's work that, these case studies are building, and why we're running these kind of conversations. Thanks for the inputs, Tara. I'm going to hand over to Leonora.
Yes, fantastic. So the International Education Funders Group have also published a series of case studies about collaborations in the education sector, and it just would be incredibly valuable for us, Leonora, to hear your impressions and thoughts about what you've read from the case studies, but also what you've heard in the conversation just now, how that relates to the thinking you have all done internationally. So over to you, Leonora.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm going to say, but something you said at the beginning, which is the purpose of collaboration is more than to do a project, really resonated. At the IEFG, we're a network of education philanthropies. So I work for the core team, and we work quite closely often with IPASA. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the collaboration stuff we've done in general with our members, and then go into a bit of detail on the education and climate collaborations that we've been trying to foster over the last couple of years. I'm responsible in the IEFG core team for philanthropic coalitions. So that literally means trying to get our members to work together. And so I've been doing quite a lot of thinking and quite a lot of writing and quite a lot of talking about collaboration. And we did start with, I started with this series about collaboration in general, looking across our members and looking who are all education philanthropy, right? So it's a very particular type of collaboration. It's philanthropy with philanthropy, which means there is a need to sort of face the power dynamics head on in a way that perhaps isn't so much the case when it's philanthropy and other partners in the sector. So I put together a series of case studies on collaboration. One of those collaborations was actually Matri and Xenex, looking at kind of what had gone well and what successful philanthropic collaboration could look like. And that was really well received by members, partly because, well, I mean, it's great to know when you've done something that's worked, and a lot of effort and thought and hard work went into those collaborations. But when I was talking to our members, what I heard more of was kind of, oh my gosh, this is really, really hard. So my second series was all about collaboration is hard, and I kind of categorized what came up through these conversations. And what was interesting is that many, many more of our members wanted to talk to me about that series than had wanted to talk to me about kind of spotlighting their great work. So I think it's something, just a lot of what, the conversations that I've heard over the last hour, you've been talking about what collaboration looks like and why it's difficult and what it takes. And just to give you an idea, I mean, we heard that collaboration is hard because power is money, and that power is not always acknowledged. We heard that collaboration was hard because of processes, so different foundations with different processes that don't match and can't speak to each other. Collaboration is hard. I mean, like, I'm repeating what I've heard basically over the last hour, but the collaboration is hard because we aren't all collaborating for the same reasons. So some are doing it because of a call from the field, some are doing it because their board has asked to do it. Collaboration is hard because not everybody puts in the same amount of effort, and you kind of get out what you put in. Collaboration is hard because of different levels of comfort around cost or speed or risk or innovation. It's hard because often there's a reliance on one person, sometimes one organization, but often one key person to pull everyone together. It's hard because of what became known as egos and logos. So everyone has their own winning strategy that needs to, go on the box. There was quite a lot of conversation about collaboration being hard because of people's bosses. So the people who do the work aren't always the decision makers, and the decision makers themselves can be really hard work. And that might be a CEO, it might be a board member, it might be someone else. But we left this series with a kind of, what, collaboration is hard, but because we've identified all of this, we can make it easier. And we have this definition that's come out of all of the work that we've been doing with members about collaboration. This is why this more than a project phrase really resonated, because we saw that although we call a lot of things collaboration, when you dig into it, it doesn't always seem to be very collaborative. So although everyone is kind of committed to the idea of working together, actually at the core of collaboration was often kind of the ability of one individual organization to convince others to come on board with their initial idea. And that's not the same thing. And so we kind of went back and we said, well, what does it really mean to collaborate? And again, this is philanthropy to philanthropy. So people who have to acknowledge the fact that they both come with power. It's not somebody turning up with money and saying, hey, do you want to come on board with my idea? And it's a sort of easier ask. So we know that kind of incentives in philanthropy can pull against real collaboration, but we've tried to identify what we think real collaboration looks like. So we have this working definition, which is if you are collaborating, what that means is you are really understanding the system, so like the big picture, who's in it, what's happening, what the gaps are, and you're committing to a process of continually understanding that as it moves and changes. It's not something that's like, this is the system, this is the picture, this is what we do. It's every day, okay, who's speaking, who's doing that, blah, 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 what's changing. You also have to understand your position in the system. The strengths that you have and the power that you have and the levers that you have, but also the things that you can't do and your own blind spots. And for philanthropy, for example, quite often they're not the ones that are in a particular country or in a particular context, they're removed. And that's something that they need to acknowledge and make space for. I mean, even saying make space for, puts power firmly in one person's camp, to make space for other people. So even these things are things that we need to be sort of holding our head. You have to, if you're collaborating, accept a certain loss of power and, create space for other actors, or just not take up too much space. And you have to be able to work together to achieve a specific goal. And you have to be comfortable with that being iterative and alive. So collaboration, actually, when we talk about it, often isn't really to do with co-funding at all. It's much more about a mindset. And our members have taken quite a lot of time to refine it with us. We have kind of tried to apply this to a particular group of philanthropy. So our members are all education funders, but we're seeing more and more that the climate crisis obviously intersects with education, but that our members have particular kind of constraints in their funding, in that they are education funders, and what they need to see for their boards, for their strategies, is an improvement in learning outcomes. And that can make any kind of cross-sector engagement and collaboration difficult, because there's always a fear that if you're an education funder and you start funding climate, for example, that you're going to divert money into a different sector that's not yours, and you're not going to be fulfilling what you're supposed to be doing. And we saw with our members a kind of a nervousness about, well, I'm not an expert, I don't know how to do this, so I don't want to get it wrong. But also, okay, if I'm going to work with another sector, climate, we kind of have to work at the lowest common denominator, which means maybe infrastructure for schools, which is difficult for a lot of education funders, they don't do infrastructure, or it means funding a curriculum, which again isn't necessarily where they're putting their efforts. They're focusing on foundational literacy and numeracy, for example, or things that are more difficult to see the collaborative opportunities. And so the way that we sort of supported this collaboration is to try and take our members through that definition of collaboration together. And we did it through a podcast where we asked members to sit and talk to each other about where they were on the kind of climate and education funding spectrum, from thinking about their own operations as a funder. So, where do they fly? How often do they fly? Do they recycle? That kind of sustainability strategy kind of thing, through their funding practices, all the way to the really difficult thing of aligning their endowments or investments with climate positive policies. So making sure that they're not putting money into something that's damaging, whilst then funding with their philanthropic arm something that's supposed to mitigate that. That's really difficult, and that's a board level decision, and there's lots in between. And so we sat them down and we brought funders together, and we were surprised by how many were happy to talk to us, and also surprised by how many who we thought had something really valuable to add to the sector were nervous about appearing in a podcast and refused because they didn't want to get it wrong. They didn't feel like they were expert enough to do that. And we actually wrote quite a long blog about what that means and what that says and what that kind of implies for collaboration, which I can send because I don't have time to talk about it all now. I know my time is nearly up. But the blog looked at things, along this kind of spectrum of collaboration, and really sort of laid out, along the spectrum of the intersections of climate and education, and really laid out the different ways in which funders can start collaborating by committing to a process of learning together. The group went through this was sort of a whole year process, and they met in person, they talked about their challenges, they talked about what they could do in the future. They brought in others from the sector. It has been a long and slow process. They're now at the point where they realise that they are a core group of education and climate philanthropies who see the value in each other's work, who know that they can't be good education funders if they don't take the climate into account, because the learners won't be there, the teachers won't be there, and a group of climate funders who know that education is a really, really good way to address some of the some of the climate crisis, either through mitigation or adaptation. And so they're committed to continuing this together. And they're now working together through a kind of outreach and advocacy strategy, which will take us to London Climate Action Week, which will probably take us to UNGA and New York Climate Week. And hasn't yet led to co-funding, even though, you know, for philanthropy, that is kind of the ultimate goal with a collaboration. So kind of I can share some of the resources that I've talked about with you in terms of kind of how we're thinking and writing, but I'm really pleased to be here both on the kind of the collaboration side and the climate and education side. And I think just to finish, like one of the things that we've seen is that, I mean, I'm English, I live in France and I'm English. A lot of our members are based in the States or based in Europe, but we have quite an active group of South African members. And one of the countries that we've seen this climate and education conversation really take off in, partly through the work of IPASA and partly through kind of the desire of members who have been working with IPASA, is that this has really taken root in a very kind of concrete way in a country. And I think one of the things the group is interested in doing is bringing that as a case study to a wider audience of philanthropy around the world, to show how something can really happen, you know, in partnership with government, in partnership with real people, in a way that actually moves the sector or the two sectors collaboration forward together. I will stop there, but I'm happy to share any of the details if it's helpful. Thanks for asking me to join you.
Thank you, Leonora. That was absolutely fascinating, and it's lovely to hear that so many, I suppose, similar themes keep coming up, and you know, that everybody's struggling with this. Before I just open it back up again to everyone, and then maybe for the other panelists, if you've got any closing remarks. One of the things that came up for me when you were speaking, Leonora, is that in thinking about collaboration, you kept saying that some of the funders didn't want to talk because they felt like they didn't know enough about it, right? So yes, thank you for the link in the chat. Is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Do you guys know the Dunning-Kruger effect? It's a wonderful idea that basically, so let me just, actually I just found a lovely picture of it. So this is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that the less you know about something, the more confident you are that it's like easy and that of course you know it, right? And then as soon as you start knowing and discussing and thinking more about it, you suddenly realize that there's a lot more to this and it's much more complicated and you feel much more insecure, right? So you come down. So the more knowledge you have, you suddenly lose your sense of, okay, I know how to do this. And then you slowly work your way up towards a more expert view, but you actually end up thinking less confidently about it than when you started and didn't actually know much about it yet. So sort of as a sector, whether we're talking about philanthropy or, you know, even NGOs, I think we're sort of on the slide down from the peak to the valley of despair, it gets called down here, where there's a bit of knowledge and we've started talking about it. Now we're all really insecure because it all looks so complicated, and we have to work our way up towards kind of collective expertise, where it's exactly what Leonora said. It's this constant exploration of how the system is changing and what your own role is and how it's developing. You never sit there and say, okay, now we know how to do this. You constantly collectively work out how to do it, you know? But there is some progress, I think. As soon as we have a collective like scaredness about this is really hard, that's a sign that we're moving in the right direction. And it's actually like very concretely telling us that we're doing this right. And I think that's possibly quite helpful. All right, Shano, you had a hand up. I'd just love to hear sort of closing remarks from the panelists, and then I'll hand it back to Viwe to close us out, possibly, or Giles.
Yeah, I think I just want to, you know, I know you said a lot, Leonora, but the thing that just stood out for me and is about the aspect of being learning, you know, the aspect of learning and the idea of, in this context, you know, when you're collaborating, the idea of constantly being in that process of learning, you know, and learning and innovating is kind of like that iterative process. So for me, I mean, I can just speak from my own personal experience of the Fundisa network. And I think, you know, having a very strong research element built into the collaboration is always very important, because that helps you to learn in that process as well and be able to innovate as you go along. So, thanks.
Thank you. Ayanda?
I would say time, because collaboration requires time to really build those relationships where we align and trust each other more, and trust each other to be able to learn. And also, I think being agile is critical. And then lastly, I think I'm very hopeful. Just hearing from Leonardo on you know, climate being seen as a huge thing that impacts education, right? We only do have just one planet. And for teaching and learning to take place, we need that environment to do that. So yeah, I would say it's really just to be kind to yourselves in the collaboration. I think what I'm seeing within the Fundisa, DBE, all our partners, is that care, really being intentional about caring about each member, caring about the different objectives, and bringing the human in the space. Yeah, thanks, Tara.
Thank you, Ayanda. Liko, your last thoughts?
Sure, Tara. I think that, yes, perhaps earlier or as we have been discussing, we may have identified quite a lot of challenges and poked a lot of holes on the work that, you know, we have been doing. But I think that it must be very clear that, number one, the work and the traction that you have already achieved, colleagues, in the small spaces that you have been working in, count for something for our country. And I don't ever want you to feel that whatever you've been doing is not appreciated and it's being shunned down or watered down. Number two, the fact of the matter is that government does not have expertise and resources and capacity to do this work. And so whether big or small, you are needed in the room. That's number two. Number three, I do want to say that the fact that we're even having this conversation means that we are at the right place at the right time, because you all know that last year and the year before that and decades and centuries before this, we would not even have this assembly of, you know, meeting of the minds to talk about these things. The fact that we're questioning it, we're querying the space, and we're asking ourselves questions in the work that we have been doing all along with no accountability and with no one asking us what to do. It means that we are developing as a community of practice and as a network. And I don't want that to dampen our you know, interest in the work. I want us to use it as a stepping stone to get us to the next level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You are a motivational speaker. I really appreciate that. It's a beautiful closing. Can we ask Fia to close us out and give us a few last thoughts from the perspective of IPASA?
Thank you, Tara. And I really want to start by saying I really appreciate that NASCEE is putting this series on to share the collaboration case studies further, because, you know, we've been learning about collaboration and about climate through the past few years. And the most important thing is relationship that has come out of all the work that we've done in this space. And these webinars are just contributing to building those relationships and then learning within that trust relationship. I think somebody else also said that, and keeping at it and just being okay with not having perfection. I think IFG's blogs also talked about that very often it seems like in the education sector, there's this need to first have it right before we start. And it doesn't work like that. It's more like a design thinking process. We have enough information to start and you learn together as you go along, and you find with that discomfort of being in that downward slide of the Dunning-Kruger effect, because you trust each other and there's a common objective. I think what's powerful about today's convening is we actually have 4 critical networks, impact networks together here. We've got NASCEE, who convenes implementing partners. We've got IPASA, who convenes funders. We've got government, which is a whole network on its own. And we have IFG that connects this education climate space to the global space. So I think this was really great to have this conversation. And I think the diversity of stakeholders, as Lieke has also said, is absolutely important, and that everybody has a role to play where they are at in the system. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this work will be going. Something that Leonora hasn't mentioned is that they are also looking at influencing funding flows and getting education into the climate debates as a priority. So I think there's a lot of good groundwork that has been laid, and we will keep in touch with everybody in this network.
Thank you very much. Viwe, Giles, are we closing up the session? Good, thanks to everyone.
Yes, very happy. I think Fia did a brilliant job. Thanks to everyone. I think we will be looking at writing up some of these insights. Viwe, I don't know if there's anything you want to close out with, but to everyone, thank you very much.
Yeah, just from my side, we'll be doing one report for the whole series. So we had our first episode a few weeks ago. This is our second. The third one is, I think, 2 or 3 weeks from now. All that information will come from our NASCEE email. And yeah, just to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and to the panelists and to Tara for really such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Tara.